Good morning. Welcome back to Baptist for Liberty. I'm your host, Joanna Works. Today is July 10th. Yesterday, we took a little break and I didn't do a program. But this morning, we have a pretty good program with you today. I did a phone interview of Barry Isenhour, who is with the Virginia Flaggers. So today we're talking Civil War history and Confederacy and Southern heritage. This interview was edited. It's not the raw version. We ran pretty long, so I had to cut a little bit here and there. But I hope you enjoy. Can we just start with maybe what is your purpose with defending the heritage?
Well, both the Defending the Heritage and the Virginia flagging have two main elements. One is on the Facebook, the Defending the Heritage is basically just doing that, defending our Southern heritage and educating in a large way. There was a lot of our posts are just good, solid history, educating folks about the war between the states and the view of the Southern patriot, essentially. The Virginia flagging is the same type of thing, except we are on street corners or in buildings and things like that, actually with flags where people stop and ask us what we're doing. So there we're educating on a more one-to-one basis as people engage us on the streets.
What is it about your heritage, other than the flag in particular, do you think needs defending that's under attack right now?
Oh my goodness. Just currently right now we have the flags at the Washington Lee University, the Lee Chapel. The president has decided to actually surrender to a bunch of radical students who don't like the flag in a chapel. So he's taking them down. And so that's an example. I mean, we see it all over the place. The origin of the Virginia Flaggers was the Museum of Fine Art here in Richmond took the flags, the Confederate battle flags, off of the Confederate War Memorial Chapel on the property, and that's what started us flagging. So we have all kinds of defense of the flags and our heritage. I mean, it happens, unfortunately, too often.
Is there other elements of Southern culture that you see under attack today?
Well, we don't really deal with anything outside of what the Southern soldier went through. Excuse me. Our goal is to honor the Confederate soldier who, in all cases, regardless of what state they came from, whether it was Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, etc., they all were called by the individual states to defend those states against an invasion, an unconstitutional and indeed an illegal invasion of their homes and property. So we try to honor them and put their viewpoint out there of what they fought for and in many cases died for. And then, of course, you have on Defending the Heritage, we have the aspect of the Reconstruction years, to where the ones that did survive, how they had to go through brutal military occupation and all kinds of things that is unimaginable today, but they did go through it. So that's where we focus. The Southern culture in general, I think Hollywood speaks volumes about how they always are misrepresenting Southern culture, but that's another thing. That's totally out of our purview. Our purview is about the soldier, the veteran, the Confederate veteran, and the Confederate soldier. That's what we focus on.
I think that brings the Civil War, I think, raises a lot of interesting perspectives on Christians in warfare. Are you, sir, a professed Christian?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
In fact, I'm glad you brought that up. Battle flag that we are so often associated with as a racist flag in today's contemporary society is nothing of the sort. We have documents from the Museum of the Confederacy and other documents written at the time by the men who invented the flag, who actually designed it as the Cross of St. Andrews. I don't know whether you're familiar with the Cross of St. Andrews. It's the most ancient symbol of Christianity that exists outside of the fish. St. St. Andrews, as you know, was one of Christ's disciples, and he was crucified, standing up, basically stretched out in the on the cross, diagonal, like the Confederate battle cross. And he was actually alive. They actually had him out. The Roman governor of the region had him on this post to be eaten by wild animals, and instead he preached so many conversions to Jesus that after 3 days the governor demanded that he be released. But when they cut him off the cross, he just dropped dead. So that is the most ancient Christian symbol there is. And in fact, the Confederate officers, particularly General Beauregard, some people may have heard of that particular general, was one of the generals who adopted the St. Andrew's cross as opposed to the Crusader cross, which we're all familiar with the Crusader cross, because they did not want to exclude the Jewish Confederates. And so that's why they adopted the St. Andrew's cross. So it is absolutely a Christian symbol from the beginning. And it was known as such, and it is such. So to us, the Christian values were in the Southern Soldier, and then in 1862, you had what is known as the Great Revival of the Southern Army, to where literally Christianity spread throughout the Confederate Army, and they became extremely religious. One of the reasons that we're so adamant about flagging the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts is that chapel there, the little, what was known as the Pelham Chapel or the Confederate War Memorial. That little chapel was built by the veterans themselves, and that was a replica of the type of chapels they built all over the South when battle lines were drawn, particularly with Petersburg, for example. The Southern soldier was a Christian soldier. And that is something that's very important, and people do kind of forget that, but we do remind them. We do remind them.
Okay. And, you're doing this education effort in the South itself, so even Southerners don't know all their history. So how did you come to learn these things and appreciate these values?
The history has been taught in public schools. I think anyone would understand it is an abomination to all of our children all over the United States, not just in the South. I don't know why the federal government is out to destroy the children, but they are doing a good job of it. So history has long since come out of the public schools, or we refer to them as the government schools. Why? I guess they don't want the truth out there. However, the history is there in not only museums, but also archives and writings of the people who went through this. And so, fortunately, we do have a lot of the original papers and things of the men and women who fought this war and why they fought this war. And so our history comes from source materials, not books written 100 years later, but actually source material of the people writing at the time. So that's very important to keep in mind. We're not revisionist history. We're just actually telling history as it is.
Right, I understand that. I'm just wondering, for you personally, how did you come to study this?
Personally, I have been studying this war my entire life, for over 50 years. I can't tell you the number of books I've read and the participation I have in museums, archival programs, and things. So to me, it's an ongoing source. I mean, I'm constantly learning about this war, constantly. And again, I emphasize we're using source material. We're not trying to interpret it. We're just actually reading what the people at the time wrote. So I think most of the Southern historians are the same way. They're getting the information from source material, writings that people at the time did, and why they did things. And it's just a matter of finding them and educating yourself on them. And then we try to, disseminate that out through the society and let people know that, first of all, the Southern soldier was an American. The South seceded from the Union. They called themselves the Confederate States of America. They were fighting for George Washington and Thomas Jefferson's view of the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. They believed in America, and they believed that the country, the federal government, had become corrupt. Imagine that, the federal government being corrupt. Doesn't have any relevance in today's time, I imagine.
Right.
So that's what they were fighting for. And in fact, if you go down the line, the same things they were fighting for and unfortunately dying for were the same things that we're facing today in our modern era of the same government out of control. So it's something that is relevant to everyone in today's society. And unfortunately, the schools, as far as the public schools, have let down their charge of educating their children. The good news is there are a lot of private schools. There are a great number of home schools that, of course, teach this material. And when I grew up in the 60s, this was still in the school system. In other words, we still had not had the corruption of the revisionists and what we call the haters, the people who hate Southern culture and hate, I think they hate America, but they're always out there complaining about Southern culture, particularly with the war. And so it wasn't until the 70s and 80s that they took over the curriculum, I believe. As you know, the South is considered the Baptist territory, and a lot of Southern soldiers were Baptist, as well as Presbyterian and else, but mostly were Baptist and Presbyterian. I think it's important for people to understand that in our view today, you are considered a religious person, I guess, if you go to church or et cetera. However, 150 years ago, it was your lifestyle was part of your life. You didn't think of it as something separate from your life. You were a child of God. You were a Christian. You were part of the community. And so a lot of the Christian beliefs come right out of the Bible. The Christian beliefs that come right out of the Bible. The Southern soldier was right there. They believed in freedom. They believed in the pursuing, your own happiness in the way of community and things like that. However, like any good soldier, they were willing to fight for it. And I believe that they upheld in an incredible way God's truths, because they were not a pillaging, conquering army as so many armies of the past. They literally were Christian soldiers fighting to defend their homes. And it's amazing how what they went through, when the average person understands what they went through, and kept their Christian beliefs even after defeat, after the war, it shows how much the Christianity was in their life as part of them. It wasn't a separation from them. It was part of them.
Right. One of the things that I was wondering about is, there's a lot of movies and people get their ideas of the Civil War, I think, more from entertainment and movies. And one of the big ones in the last couple of years was that movie Lincoln.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see that movie?
I did not.
Okay, so you wouldn't have any comments?
I read reviews of it, and I actually know some people who were, the big characters in it. There was people who were reenactors. We have a lot of reenactors and things that are in our group, and so I know a lot of people who actually were in the movie as actors and behind the scenes. Lincoln is an interesting thing, and history, basically, when you murder 500,000 people and destroy the country because of your own ego and illegality and your greed of taking over the South through taxes and tariffs, then you have to make up a myth about why you did that, and that's the myth of Lincoln. Lincoln, first of all, never professed Christianity. He talked about it. He talked religion, but he never professed Christianity. In fact, he was a believer in Marxism and was an actual friend of Karl Marx.
Right.
So Lincoln is not, in my mind, a Christian president or leader, as opposed to someone like, let's say, Jefferson Davis or Robert E. Lee or Stonewall Jackson, extreme Christian leaders. And certainly Robert E. Lee, people forget that Robert Harvey Lee grew up around Mount Vernon and was part of the society in Virginia that followed after George Washington, who was absolutely a Christian. And so Lincoln, to me, is a murdering thug. And that's about as nice as I can say in public. What he did and the things that he perpetrated. And he is no example of a good Christian by any means. He's no example of a good president. In fact, he was a murdering thug. That's what can I say? And that's history. In his own words, you read his own words. He really was a very mixed-up individual. He really was.
Right, and I brought up that particular movie because this month I'm working on doing a couple of movie reviews, and that was going to be one of those that I was going to watch and review. And lately, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say lately, people like to compare quotes from Lincoln versus Obama, as if, Lincoln was this great liberator of the black man, and yet look at our first black president. And I think it's pretty ridiculous because you can take a quote from any president and make them look bad or good. It's the actions and the actual intent of what they said that's important.
Exactly. Several things about Mr. Lincoln and the slaves. First of all, he, in many speeches, it's not one speech, so it's the way his point of view, he did believe that the black people were an inferior race. Mm-hmm. No question. He said that many times. He campaigned on that. He also campaigned that he was not start a war to liberate the black man. And the interesting thing, he was part of a group of, while he himself was never an abolitionist, he aligned himself with them and promised them that he would buy an African colony, which they did, Liberia, and they would ship the blacks out of the country. Now think about that. If you are a liberator, and all of a sudden you take generations that have grown up American, and they are Americans, and all of a sudden you ship them over to a country, and the experiment over 30,000 that they did ship back, most of them died through starvation. I mean, that was just horrible what they did to those people. The other thing is, when he did his emancipation, he only freed the blacks, or the slaves, in the southern territories. None of the territories of the Union had conquered. An example, at that time, North Carolina, the East Coast had been occupied. New Orleans had been occupied. Lincoln, specifically, it's in the document, those parts of the South that had been captured by the Union were under the Union control. The slaves were still slaves. The other thing that most people don't realize is they don't understand why the war. And the war is very simple. It was greed. It was off the Morriff taxes. And the Morriff taxes were passed in 1861. And basically the South went into a 40% tax rate. And the South was already paying 80% of the federal treasury at that time. So, and Lincoln himself, in his inauguration and also his declarations of war, were coming south to collect revenue. He specifically said he was not going to do away with slavery. In fact, he and the abolitionists had come up with the Corn tariff, the Corn Amendment, which would have been the 13th Amendment. It went through Congress, was passed. That the states that currently had, if the South would come back into the Union, the states that had slavery would be allowed in those territories into perpetuity. And so, again, he was no free person of the blacks. In fact, he was a murdering thug, because a lot of the blacks, an example we just found out in Vicksburg, where they have the mass graves of thousands of black slaves who were put in the territory, a swamp, basically. They contained them there, and they basically starved them there. And these were theoretically freed blacks who the men were conscripted. In other words, they were forced into the military service. The women and children were forced into these basic concentration camps and died. But that was right now on the news last week, of how they found more skeletal because really anyone. And I also want to say, when you do your research, look into the Copperhead movement up north. The Copperhead movement were a group of people who did not agree with the war. They wanted it stopped. And as a result, Lincoln put a lot of these people in prison. He just would put them in prison for political dissent. You also had in 1864, Lincoln came up with stopping the exchange of prisoners of war that had been going on since 1862. It's called the Dix Hill Cartel. Basically, when you have the Union soldier captured and the Confederate soldier, they would exchange. So most of these soldiers, when they were captured and put into prisons, were in prison for less than a couple months. Well, when Lincoln did away with the exchange totally, he sentenced to death not only the northern soldier, because, as you know, the South in 1864 and stuff could not feed itself, much less thousands and thousands and tens of thousands of Union prisoners. So the North used that as a propaganda against the South, and therefore in northern prisons, which had plenty of food, they were not under war conditions. They purposely starved and murdered Confederate prisoners of war. I mean, this is absolutely, we just found out a couple months ago that in Point Lookout, Maryland, which was the number 2 murder place, the Union forces had murdered about 3,500 Southern boys out there, and the conditions of which they were in that prison were unbelievable. However, we just found some ledgers that the Union people kept at the National Archives, and this history now shows that there is an additional 5,000 more Confederate soldiers murdered at Point Lookout. It's just unbelievable. The war crimes that Lincoln, absolutely, in his administration, just perpetrated. It's just unbelievable. When you look at that, you really can't believe it happened in America, but it did.
Mhm. Yeah.
So, and I have no sympathy for Mr. Lincoln. In fact, I believe, from a Christian point of view, he was possessed by multiple demons, and he was a child of Satan. That's my personal view. That's not a flagger view. That's not a defensive heritage. That is my personal view, that Lincoln was possessed, and he was a child of Satan. I don't know how else to describe his actions.
Right. I mean, mass murderer, it's pretty hard to defend.
Well, yeah, and he did it. I mean, he just was unbelievable.
Okay. I have 2 more questions before we run out of time. The first one is, in the North, Unitarianism became really popular. So it was Christianity by the sword. In the South, did Unitarianism find any footholds?
No, it didn't. In fact, we were in church the other day, in a Baptist church, and they sang the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And the group of us who were there did not sing it, because that was written by a Unitarian, and in that song, which many people sing in churches all over the country, South, North, that was written exactly what you said. It was reconciliation, Christianity at the sword. It was amazing. So in the South, I would say Unitarianism did not take off. In fact, it's one of those things of Reconstruction that is abhorrent to the Southern soul, because it is so un-Christian, I guess would be the word for it. So, not big in the Unitarian movement, although I'm sure that there's Unitarian groups in the South. I mean, I'm sure that there are, but as a whole, that is not something that the Southern person, certainly the Confederate soldier, accepted.
Okay. Do you have any idea why it worked, and how it could become so popular in the North, who also claimed to be a very Christian country?
Because of the difference in the type of Christianity that came to the North through the Puritan movement versus the South, which were the Episcopals and basically Protestant movement. That's where you start the difference. You have 2 different attitudes, 2 different type of people, and I don't really want to go into the Puritan base movements of the North, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, etc. But it's a different style of Christianity. It was invented by radical groups in Europe that basically were kicked out of Europe. The Pilgrims, to me, are an example of what's wrong with the country. What they did to not only the Indians, which were the tribes, peoples that they encountered. They enslaved them and murdered them. And actually, that was the first slavery in the country, where the Puritans taking the natives. Whereas in the South, you had the Virginia colony, etc., that integrated with the Indian population. I've always said the South is a melding pot, where the North is a melting pot. The melting pot of the North, you either get in line or you will conform to the Northern way, and I think that comes strictly from the Puritan view of their version of Christianity, which is not the Protestant view, which the Baptists, which even the Baptists were not necessarily Protestant, they were anti-Baptist, but they came out of that Martin Luther and Calvin and a lot of the other folks who wanted to reform the Catholic Church. So the real Christianity, to me, came into the South. It did not go into the North. And that's why the Northern view of Christianity is so different. In today's world, too, as well as at that time. Two different philosophies of what Christianity is.
Right. Okay, and
that's strictly my opinion.
Right. I just want to say, regarding the Pilgrims, they weren't actually Puritans. They were separatists, which a lot of historians will confuse.
You're right, but again, I use the Puritan as a catch term for all those groups that came in up north. Go ahead. I put them in the same boat. Sorry.
Right.
But you're right. Technically, they were not Puritans. They were separatists.
Yeah, and but yeah, Baptists, the Anabaptists, they come before the Protestant movement too. I have to agree with you on that one. Okay, so just a final question to wrap up. Where do you recommend people to start on reading and researching on these issues?
In the actual libraries and in history museums that have these documents. Some stuff, there's a lot of documents on the National Archives. The federal government does have a system of some of these things now available. But most of it are going to be in small local libraries or museums that have these archives. So they're all over the South. Here in Virginia, you have what used to be the Museum of the Confederacy, had a lot of archives. You also have other Confederate archives in South Carolina, in Tennessee, North Carolina. So it's really going to the source materials. A lot of this stuff is tended to be put online, so it's not as convenient as some things. It's just a matter of going and doing a research the old-fashioned way.
Yep.
Books and papers that are in these archives.
Right. Is there any particular book you would recommend?
Not really, because it depends on what you're viewing and what you're trying to do. I don't think there's any book that is a catch-all to explain the war between the states or the war of northern aggression. I think that there are many good books out there that deal with the subjects, but I also would say that there are a lot of books out there that are written for the lens. The thing that you have to realize is when you reinterpret things. An example, we're 21st century, and now we're going to interpret the 19th century. Well, as a historian, your job is to not do that, not to put your modern views into a history. That's a very difficult thing to do, because today, as an example, there's no Southerner that I know that wants to reinstitute slavery. You know what I'm saying? That's just nonsense. We're 21st century people, but yet in the 18th century, rather the 19th century, 1800s, that was a different viewpoint, and it was universal all over the world, and it was something that is foreign to us, as it should be. Although there is modern slavery today in Africa, usually the Muslims are doing a lot of slavery, as they still do. But it's something that we have to be careful of. So when you they getting the material from? Are they going to the source material, actually what Robert E. Lee wrote, or actually what Jefferson Davis wrote, or they are interpreting their view of what the history should be? That's the difference. There are a lot of books out there that tell you their opinion. You just want to find the source materials, and usually it's letters. There was diaries written at the time. They were published at the time. Literally the papers, their entire books of papers of Robert E. Lee and other Southerners that you can, the actual papers that they wrote, the letters and things. And that's a start. But just be careful of getting into interpretation. That includes the Southern view. There are some people who, again, put their modern view of the South, which is not correct. So I just encourage everyone to go to the source material, and that is a harder thing to do. You have to go to the libraries, and you have to literally sit down and do research.
And no shortcuts.
No, there isn't. And again, why should there be? You're dealing with good, solid American history, and it is a good part of America. Everyone says this was a dark period of American history. I differ. I think it was the first time that we established that what Thomas Jefferson had written in the Declaration of Independence, what Mr. Madison had written in the Constitution, were godly and were God-inspired. And the southern part of the country wanted to continue that. They wanted to continue that. Where it was the North by this time had become so corrupt through greed that they did not want to do that. They had gone away from the Constitution. They were using it as a political weapon against the South. And so I think that it was a good part, and I think a lot of the people in Tea Party movements, I certainly think a lot of people in our religious movements are absolutely on the same page as a Southern soldier and the Southern folks at the time. They're fighting tyranny at different levels, overreach of the federal government, which is not the Constitution. The Constitution is basically a guidebook of what the government should not do, and the South believed in that. It was the North that chose not to. Of course, the North did win the war, so the conquerors write the books, and we see Mr. Lincoln's war in today's world, and now it's an assault on the entire country, in my opinion.
Right. Okay. With that, we actually went over our time.
This is my opinion of things. As far as the Virginia Flaggers and the Heritage Defense, we're out there promoting with the soldiers. That's what we do. We want people to realize the Confederate soldier was an honorable American veteran who fought to save their family from an invasion. And that's what we stand for, and that's why we do what we do.
All right. Once again, it is time for our Proverbs reading. Today we are in chapter 10. The Proverbs of Solomon: a wise son maketh a glad father, but a foolish son is the heaviness of his mother. Treasures of wickedness profit nothing, but righteousness delivereth from death. The Lord will not suffer the soul of the righteous to famish, but he casteth away the substance of the wicked. He becometh poor that dealeth with a slack hand, but the hand of the diligent maketh rich. He that gathereth in summer is a wise son, but he that sleepeth in harvest is a son that causeth shame. Blessings are upon the head of the just, but violence covereth the mouth of the wicked. The memory of the just is blessed, but the name of the wicked shall rot. The wise in heart will receive commandments, but a prating fool shall fall. He that walketh uprightly walketh surely, but he that perverteth his ways shall be known. He that winketh with the eye causeth sorrow, but a prating fool shall fall. The mouth of a righteous man is a well of life, but violence covereth the mouth of the wicked. Hatred stirreth up strifes, but love covereth all sins. In the lips of him that hath understanding wisdom is found, but a rod is for the back of him that is void of understanding. Wise men lay up knowledge, but the mouth of the foolish is near destruction. The rich man's wealth is his strong city, the destruction of the poor is their poverty. The labor of the righteous tendeth to life, the fruit of the wicked to sin. He is in the way of life that keepeth instruction, but he that refuseth reproof erreth. He that hideth hatred with lying lips and he that uttereth a slander is a fool. In the multitude of words there wanteth not sin, but he that refraineth his lips is wise. The tongue of the just is as choice silver, the heart of the wicked is little worth. The lips of the righteous feed many, but fools die for want of wisdom. The blessing of the Lord it maketh rich, and he addeth no sorrow with it. It is as sport to a fool to do mischief, but a man of understanding hath wisdom. The fear of the wicked, it shall come upon him, but the desire of the righteous shall be granted. As the whirlwind passeth, so is the wicked no more, but the righteous is an everlasting foundation. As vinegar to the teeth, and as smoke to the eyes, so is the sluggard to them that send him. The fear of the Lord prolongeth days, but the years of the wicked shall be shortened. The hope of the righteous shall be gladness, but the expectation of wicked shall perish. The way of the Lord is strength to the upright, but destruction shall be to the workers of iniquity. The righteous shall never be removed, but the wicked shall not inhabit the earth. The mouth of the just bringeth forth wisdom, but the froward tongue shall be cut out. The lips of the righteous know what is acceptable, but the mouth of the wicked speaketh frowardness.